it gets really steep and it goes down. This shouldn't get the same treatment as flat or Sammamish flat areas do. And then for Inglewood, which is just right here where Tamarack is, Inglewood is adjacent to Tamarack. It's got a lot more lots. The lots can be down 2,500 square feet instead of about the 10,000 square feet, which is R4 development in Sammamish, or excuse me, in Tamarack. And Inglewood also is like this. It starts off where it goes pretty steep right here, and then it goes down. So since the plat, then there isn't a plat, it already exists, and there's no developer, the individual lots need to get dealt with. A lot of the easy ones have gone, practically all of them have gone. The hard ones are left, and that's why we need critical areas code and things. So here's the critical drainage areas, which is the drains too, plus the erosion and landslide hazard areas. Again, we have Sammamish flat here, which it's a little bit hilly, but then we have the shoulder that drops off to the lake. So anytime we're doing that, we just can't have one rule like 500 feet or 1,000 feet or so many square feet. And for the historic plats, you can have 0 square feet before a drainage review, 200 in a landslide hazard area, and up to 500 square feet for drainage review before you go to drainage review in critical drainage areas. So that code was developed in 2017 to 2019. Thanks,
Mary. Anybody else? James?
James Eastman, East Lake Sammamish Parkway. Sorry I missed you guys last week. That was a really good meeting. I appreciate all the late hours you guys are putting in. Funny story though, I was on a flight that left at 6 and 6:30 came around. I'm like, oh shoot, it's a planning commission meeting. So I'm looking like, okay, I could watch a movie or I could pay $8 for internet and see if by chance I can get the planning commission meeting. I'm like, well, the movie theaters is like $20, so you know it's worth it for $8. I'm gonna see what I can do. So I try to pull it up on Microsoft, I think Edge browser or whatever, and I couldn't get it. And I'm like, well, maybe Google's conspiring with Chrome because they own YouTube, and maybe I can get it on Chrome. Sure enough, I pull it up on Chrome, and it starts to work a little bit, but then it's kicking out and pause it. And I'm like, well, maybe if I turn the resolution way down, I can get it. So I ended up turning the resolution all the way down to like 0, and sure enough, I was fully entertained for like 4 hours on the flight with your long planning commission meeting, so it was great. I had to watch it again because everything was really blurry with the slides since I turned the resolution down, but I could hear everything great. So if anybody's ever wondering if they can tune into the Sammamish Planning Commission from the sky, they can. But it was a really good meeting. The middle housing overlay, I'm encouraged by it. I would encourage city staff and planning commission and the consultants to just develop that to provide some flexibility. I think it's there, but I'm not quite sure because all the diagrams I've seen, I've gone back and watched that meeting probably 2 or 3 times now. Everything starts with a parent lot, and then the overlay is kind of broken down within that parent. But if it's a bar acre subdivision, you know, how far can I go? Can I keep my apples over here and my oranges over here and my bananas over here? Meaning, could I build 2 single-family homes on one side of the subdivision, have a green belt, and then 4 ADUs on the other side? Maybe that's even in a 4-unit building, I don't know, or maybe it's 2 separate duplexes with a parking lot, and maybe from that parking lot there's also 4 other units attached that, or one of them's low income, where from a total everything matches up to the allowed densities within that unit lot subdivision. But as far as the location, it allows a builder to plan, bulk, and scale all within the whole neighborhood without exceeding that allowable count, but provides much more pleasing outcomes. So I'd encourage keep going with that, and hopefully we'll be able to see that in the diagrams. Thank you.
Thanks, James. And just to be clear, lowest resolution setting is the best way to watch all planning commission meetings. Do we have anybody on the meeting?
We don't have anybody online.
Okay, thanks, Lana. So let's move on to our topic for this evening. Our main topic for this evening. Avril, are you starting, or is David going to give an introduction? Avril, go ahead.
I think we're seeing how long David can go before he jumps in. Good evening, everybody. My name is Avril Beatty. I'm the current Planning and Permit Center Manager here at the City of Sammamish in the Department of Community Development. This topic was brought to you back in the spring, but just in case you hadn't re-watched that original Planning Commission for fun, we'll just do a quick rehash of why we are here. So the state adopted Senate Bill 5290 in order to have regulations for permitting jurisdictions like cities and counties to streamline their processes and to provide incentive to do so. The bill has all sorts of fun stuff like grant funding so that cities and counties can go to electronic permit review and have electronic permitting systems. Apparently, there are still cities out there that do everything on paper. That can lead to a lot of paper cuts. I'm very appreciative that we have electronic review and permitting systems here in Sammamish. So part of 5290 also changed the way the state defines a project permit. Previously, building permits were included in these project permits, and project permits really are land use applications, things to entitle development like preliminary short plats and use permits and boundary line adjustments and things like that, versus a construction permit that would have to be administered by the building code or the fire code or the electrical code. So 5290 cleaned up the definition of project permit. And in doing so, that was a big trigger for part of this work because as of today, we have construction permits within our land use table types. And we don't want construction permits caught up in the regulations for land use permits. So when I first read this regulation, I thought, ooh, we should clean up our code a little bit. So along with what should be included within these project permit administrative regulations, there was also legislation that talked about the time periods that these different types of land use applications should be reviewed under. The Senate bill has specific numbers for different types of applications, whether or not they are reviewed administratively, whether or not there's a public notice of the application for public comment, and another time period if there is a public hearing associated with that land use application. So the Senate bill put numbers out and said, cities and counties, use these numbers unless you come up with your own numbers for these types of applications. And we did get the state attorneys and our city attorneys to all agree that cities and counties have the right to do this. Additionally, there is language in the Senate bill that talks about refunding permit review fees if timeframes are not met. And there's a formula to it. I won't bore you with that part. But the refunding requirements are not necessary if a city meets certain criterias. And those criterias include having recently updated and done a comprehensive fee schedule update, which we did do a couple of years ago, having pre-applications for like certain types of projects, things like that. So the legislation says, hey, here's this long list of things. If you do at least 3 of them, you are not required to adopt ordinance regarding refunding of fees if these timelines aren't met. The city does at least 4. So we aren't required to have refunding language within this ordinance. So And another component is reporting on review times. So we are going to have to do a lot of configuration of reports to extract data from our systems in order to meet that requirement starting in 25. So those are the big main things of 5290. So in looking at this, we originally thought, well, we need to clean up what applications that we have in our code that these regulations would fall under. And so those were things that we figured we need to get things like the building permits and our clearing and grading permits, which are all for construction, get those out of the code. And that's a cleanup. So we are considering those a category 1, something that we have to, the legislation doesn't say we have to do, but we kind of have to do because of the way the legislation is written. And then we have the category 2 things where this is a whole snowball effect. So we have typing that we need to clean up. And since we're doing that, do we need to clean up the language while we're in there? So you see in the packet, there was some modifications to some of the clearing and grading application submittal requirements. That was more of a cleanup, but was sort of a domino after looking at that section of code and relocating it back to Title 16, where we have other construction regulations. And then from there, since the whole purpose of 5290 is to help make things go a little bit faster, or maybe a lot faster, depending on the jurisdiction, how can you make the process more straightforward? And so we looked at all of our noticing requirements. There's a lot of work that goes into noticing by staff, and there's a lot of time spent, and we're trying to figure out where was the value added by having all of the effort into the very large mailing radius, into the large signs that you see for all the projects throughout the city, and then for also publishing things on the website where we have all of our legal notices. So those were things that we wanted to take a look at since we were in this section of code, like where are we getting value added? And so those things sort of broke down into, well, what are things that just sort of make sense to clean up versus what are things where this could change how the city interacts and engages with the public. So that's where we have things like our public noticing, where we considered that something more complicated, something that staff was not feeling flippant about and didn't think that we aren't the ones to make the best. Okay, staff doesn't make any of the decisions because this is an ordinance that'll hopefully be approved by City Council, but making sure we have buy-in by the community representatives to make sure it makes sense for the community. So we are presenting this to you for your discussion, and this. So the strike draft that's presented in the packet has been based on feedback that was provided at the City Council hearing and the Planning Commission hearings, and also working intensively with staff to make sure that we weren't going to be losing any pieces as language migrated, and making sure we weren't going to have anything conflicting within the code. So here we are tonight. So of these category 3 changes where we really wanted to have the public discussions and the community input, a big one is the noticing. So as is, in case you don't remember from the last time we had talked about this in the spring, we had done a survey of what other cities in the region were doing for their noticing. It was generally a 500-foot radius from the boundary of a property across the board. So our requirement for 1,000-foot with the 2,000-foot wide column going down the slope towards Lake Sammamish from the erosion hazard near sensitive water bodies overlay is a lot larger area than what any other city or county does within a nearby vicinity of the city of Sammamish. So we had talked about this before. The previous feedback from Planning Commission was to generally do a smaller radius, the 500 foot, but to still have maybe a 1,000-foot column that would go downslope to the lake. That was presented to City Council. City Council generally liked the idea of just making it simple and just keeping the 500 foot without the column. But we're here again tonight. I would love your feedback. If you would still like to see the 1,000-foot column going down the slope from the erosion hazard near Sunset water bodies overlay, or from that general area downslope towards the lake, that is something that you could have as part of your motion to City Council.
So I wanted to add one thing about this. So that one of the challenges with the column going downslope is it's unique to Sammamish. I've not seen other cities that do something like this. And at the end of the day, I understand their reason for it, but it does present a procedural issue and a potential procedural challenge if on an appeal, if it's not done properly. So it is a little complex to figure out exactly how to measure the column, where it's measured from. So if it was to be retained, I definitely would want to add some clarity about how exactly you do that. Because one of the easiest things we deal with project permits is a procedural appeal. It's low-hanging fruit to somebody who doesn't like a project. And it really adds a lot of time and delay to something, so I understand what's trying to be achieved by it. I don't like mechanically how it reads because it's really unclear how it's measured, so we'd want some clarity around that if it was to be retained. I just wanted to highlight that.
So another modification that we're proposing based on this noticing survey that we had done is that the regulations regarding on-site notice boards are very rigid with very specific height requirements and location along a street, and a minimum size. And this results in very expensive, very large signs. And one of the challenges that we have with these very large signs is when we do an RFP every 2 years for the budget cycle, we only get one response to these RFPs. And it's been the same vendor for many years now. And they are a small company. When they have staffing challenges, we've had to renotice because they weren't able to get the on-site sign up in time. And that's been a little challenging. And because they're so large, it's not something that staff can just make. So we would love to go with, so generally in the area, a lot of cities and counties have a size and layout location as determined by the director. So there's a lot of flexibility. And I don't know if you guys ever geek out on on-site signs whenever you go traveling. I do. Large signs, you see them, yes. And maybe because I am an on-site sign wonk, as I am, I notice even the smaller signs. So even the 11 by 17s, if they're at the sidewalk, they're very visible. And ones that don't have a lot of text and can just get you to a website or get you to a file number are so much more effective. Or maybe one that has like a little graphic instead of like a paragraph of whatever it is that it's proposing. So much more effective. So by giving the flexibility for the city to be able to come up with a different way of doing this that's not rigidly codified, we could come up with better solutions internally in order to get the messaging out that there's something happening at a project site. So in Redmond, they have pre-printed boards up that then they just like attach information to. Recently, they've also been attaching QR codes in addition to take you, which any on-site sign can be vandalized. I've seen it a lot. They're a great canvas for some graffiti artists. So we can't ever guarantee that no sign would ever be graffiti proof, but if we ever were to go with a QR code, we would also have written out a URL so that someone could type something in if the image of the QR code's not working. So we want to be able to do something different that's not as expensive, that's not as reliant on an outside vendor, that might absolutely mess up the timelines of getting an application notice done in accordance with the regulations.
I add one thing to that. So one other challenge with the size of sign that we have is it requires dual support, and the size of the face of the sign is more of a sail in the wind, and it requires that it be installed at a depth that requires utility locate. So that is another challenge. Is we want to make sure that, you know, whatever sign we choose, I understand like there's different reasons for different size signs. However, there are additional complications that are brought by using a larger sign. We currently use a vendor because they are the ones that are liable, not us. We don't want to be installing these signs because you could hit sprinklers, you could hit utilities, you could, you know, but what it then ends up happening is sometimes the vendor, and I'm not faulting them, but they might not install it deep enough because they weren't able to get a utility locate, and the sign falls over. And you might have seen those around town where there's some of them right over by town center where they didn't dig a deep enough hole for the sign to be installed properly. So thinking about that, another thing when talking about these mailing radiuses, we use a vendor for that as well. Talking about a sign, we use a vendor for that as well. And everything that we use a vendor for, we have to maintain a contract for. And we have to then, staffing wise, we have to, do RFQs, RFPs for proposals. We have to manage the contract. We have to do the billing. We have to do task orders, all those things that go along with it. So on the administrative end, there's a fairly large overhead for how we manage these things. In addition to that, there's also a time delay because of that. So when we start looking at these timelines that we have to follow, when an application comes in, it's deemed complete, there are all sets of clock mechanisms that are set in motion. And when we have to then send a task order to a consultant who's a vendor who's installing a sign, and then they have to come back with the form and everything that goes back and forth in there, that's a lot of time that's being used up out of the timeline. So when we say there are multiple reasons why we want to consider changing these, it's because they're affecting our overhead, our staffing, they're affecting the overall timeline, and they may not actually be that effective in the end, considering all the things we have to go through to put them up. So we've learned a lot from these over the years, and we're here to talk about sort of what do you as a community want to see. And at the end of the day, you know, we may not agree. We may say, oh, well, that's going to cause an impact here or there. But, you know, whatever we're left with, we will implement, and we will do our best job of trying to implement it.
So another proposal that's within the packet is modifying the comment period once a notice of application has gone out from 21 days to 14 days. And this falls within sort of like general public comment periods within the area, within the region. This directly relates to how much time we have to review an application. So this is part of the shot clock or chess clock, where the ball's on our court. I'm just going to mix up all my metaphors. And so this we would really strongly recommend that you support in order for us to be able to have the timelines that we're proposing. Another modification that we're proposing, this is not required by 5290, but as we were going through and reevaluating the language that's been in this administrative section of code, we came across the appeals section. And the appeal section right now is very open. There's no criteria related to how an appeal is the content of the appeal for how it's submitted. I've worked in other jurisdictions where only residents within 1,000 feet of a project site could submit an appeal. And so we aren't proposing that. What we are proposing is that there be a little bit of criteria in order to show an appellant who's not the applicant have been involved in the project application at some point. So we are proposing a change that a non-applicant appellant provide comment up into the decision. So it wouldn't even have to be just during the comment period, but as long as they provided correspondence to the city prior to the decision being issued, showing that they were aware of the project, they were concerned about the project, they were interested in the project, that would make them eligible to submit an appeal. And so this would mean that if there's ever someone who just doesn't want a project to come in, well, get engaged at the beginning. And also part of this is, don't just say, I appeal it, tell us why. Did we make a mistake and did we not meet the decision-making criteria? If so, please, we want that in the appeal documentation that's provided to us. Did we miss something in the procedural requirements? Please document that in the appeal paperwork that you submit to us. If someone can't articulate why the decision shouldn't have been made, then there's a lot of time spent by staff and by the hearing examiner to look at, doing a pre-hearing conference and having discussions and bringing in the city attorneys. There's so much time spent to see if an appeal even is supposed to be an appeal. And so right now, anything that we get, there may not be any substance to the appeal, but we have to spend a ton of staff time to get to the point for the hearing examiner to say, this isn't a valid appeal. I'm not having a hearing on it. So we've had that happen a couple of times. And so we're hoping that this helps projects move forward and help the public be engaged early on. Like, if you don't like a project, come to us when it's under review. Like, don't just come to us at the end and say, well, I don't like that you did that. Let's have the discussion early and try to make the project better and make sure that it conforms to the standards and make sure the decision-making criteria is being met and make sure that all of the procedural aspects are being followed. So that was the intent behind this portion of the code changes.
One other thing, everything Avril said, I agree with. One thing to add, and I think it's highlighted here, is that I want to go, if you can go back to the comment period slide. So I want to highlight that for project permits, comment periods are not rigid. They're guidelines. We're really trying to get someone to submit a comment within this time frame so that we can then process it, give it to the applicant, ask the applicant to make changes. However, we do still accept comments all the way into the point where a decision is made. So that, I think, plays in with the next slide, which is the appeal slide, is that somebody can submit a comment all the way up to the point where a decision's being made. And what we're trying to protect against here is that we're not receiving appeals on things about a project that we didn't even know. There are, I think, it's challenging because I have seen situations where someone discovered something about a wetland and it resulted in a different wetland typing and they filed an appeal, but they never commented on it. So there are those scenarios. I'm just trying to be completely transparent about that. I think what we're trying to do is push that more into the process, and hopefully that type of information would be revealed during the permit process itself instead of after the fact. There are many cities that use this. There are other cities that do what we do. And at the end of the day, again, like I said before, whatever we're left with implementing, we'll implement. We just have seen multiple scenarios where appeals were filed and really there was no grounds for an appeal being filed. And we had to go through and allocate the staff resources and take away from other permit projects that we're working on in order to handle that appeal scenario.
So this is the review time periods that staff is proposing in response to 5290. So these time periods, so Type 1s, these are administrative, reviewed by staff. There's no public noticing. Type 2s, public notice of application, notice of decision, appealable to the hearing examiner. Type 3s, notice of application, notice of public hearing, and then the decision is made by the hearing examiner. So 65 days, 100 days, 170 days. 5290, as I stated earlier, we did clarify with the state, we can propose other time periods, less or more. I went through several years of land use applications to see what were our sort of medians for these sort of reviews. And the type 1s, I was surprised and not surprised that some of them happen within 3 weeks. But then there were quite a few that were taking, 2 to 3 months. And looking at those, it's because we have boundary line adjustment applications that have taken a long time because they're along East Lake Sammamish Parkway, where someone is trying to do a boundary line adjustment with the county, and there's old properties, and there's property line disputes, and there's homes that are 2 feet away from a property line, and then a property line is being proposed through a chimney. This is true. Like, you can't put a property line through a chimney. Not allowed. Anyways, so then working with the city attorneys and trying to figure out a solution to move forward, there's, I would say, about a third of our type 1s take 2 to 3 months. Our shoreline exemption letters, most of them, just a few weeks. Maybe 30 to 40% of them take a long time, because then it turns out, wait, this applicant's actually trying to do more than what's allowed within an exemption letter, and there's a lot of back and forth. We have to confer with the Department of Ecology, and they get really complicated really fast. So we're proposing 90 days for those. This doesn't prevent us from reviewing the easy ones really quick. We like to get those out the door. We don't want those hanging around. However, this also indicates within our records that for an applicant to have some sense of how long will this take? Well, it could be the 90 days, because there could be something really complicated that just is a lot that we have to work through to make it conform to the regulations. The type 2s and the type 3s were just a little bit more than what was being proposed by the state legislation. So those numbers didn't really surprise me when I did the data crunching. If you do not support the changes, this is fine. Also within the proposed code changes is that as long as the applicant and the city mutually agree to a time extension, then a time extension is fine. And there's no additional processing beyond that written agreement. So if you want shorter dates, if you want shorter timelines, we can work with that.
I think one thing to add to this is that it's timeline to city action, city decision, right? So the one thing that this could spur, if we use the shorter timelines, is more frequent city denials, because we would be in a position where we're obligated to take action, but the applicant has, and their designer has not demonstrated that the project meets city codes. So we have two options here. Is one, we'd like to use the slightly longer timeline to allow us to have adequate time to work with an applicant. The other part of that is, as Avril said, that there's that option to come to agreement with the applicant that we can take longer. And in that case, it might be that the applicant is really working towards getting the design right and meeting our rules, and we're there to review it, but we just need a little bit longer, and the applicants and their designer needs a little bit longer to get it done.
Before we jump to next steps, I did get some great comments from John. Thank you. So I just wanted to touch base on there are some grammatical errors staff is totally in support of. For clarifications regarding some of the grading stuff, the grading modifications that you were pointing out. The grading section, other than the administrative application component, we weren't diving into the text of the rest of the grading component. So when it comes to excavation, that's a cut. And to date, we haven't really had any issues with civil engineers understanding what we meant by that. But we could add language if you made a motion to do so. I do recognize that there are hours of construction listed on page 29 of 65. And in the grading section, moving back to Title 16 in 16.05.030 does have hours of construction. And in order to not have potentially conflicting, I would recommend that we just strike the hours of operation from the grading part and just have it covered by the existing hours of construction that's within Title 16 already. As for decisions that can be appealed for the Public Works comments on the proposed section within 21.08.060 under right-of-way use permits. Right-of-way permits are not appealable. They have never been proposed to be appealable. I just wanted to add that language in, and this was in working with Public Works Department. They were very much wanting to have this language added in because it's a different type of application from the proposed section, which is 21.08.065, that would just cover the Public Works standards deviations and stormwater adjustment applications. And those are, under current code, required to have a notice of application, but not land use applications. Therefore, they wanted to stick with the 21-day comment period because it's not a project permit as defined by 5290. So they were fine with having that longer period. And there was a question about the mobile home regulations. This section of code that it's referring to is for temporary mobile homes for medical hardship. So it wouldn't really apply. The way the code is currently written, not super clear. I had to go double check that reference. And for the receipt of applications, an application is not received until it's been accepted through the portal that we use, which is www.mybuildingpermit.com. And applicants, the status is pending until it's accepted, and then it's considered technically received. And we added within that notice of complete application, we didn't have any language regarding if an application was deemed incomplete, how long someone would have to then prepare whatever was missing. So we wanted to add 120 days for that time period, or else we would have these not accepted, not full applications hanging around in our systems, and we didn't want to have that. But giving people 120 days to get that critical area report prepared or to get an updated title report or whatever it was seemed like a reasonable amount of time. So that's why we added that language in there. Yeah.
So going back to the complete application section, procedurally, it's received in the system, it's screened, and once it's screened as complete, then an invoice is sent. And the application actually is not deemed complete for processing, and the clock does not start ticking until that invoice is paid and the fee is processed. So that is a point. If anybody's out there listening, it's a really important point because we have applicants that are under the impression. And I mean, I don't know why, I get it. They're not necessarily reading that discrete section of code, but want to make sure everyone's aware that when you apply for a permit through MVP, it doesn't mean that is the day that you vest or the day the clock starts ticking. It's once it's deemed complete for processing, which is after it's been screened and accepted as complete and the invoice is issued and the fee is paid.
You got to get those fees paid. Moving on. So there was a comment about the definition of lot in regards to middle housing. We're not changing that definition. The middle housing regulations that'll be coming forward in October. If there's any modifications, it would be part of that, and hopefully everything Still jives. And then there's a question about oil tank removal. That's not exempt from clearing grading permits. Someone's always going to need a permit for that. And SEPA. Well, yes, they would need SEPA. I think that was all for the comments that we had received in written form. We went over the requirements via 5290 and how these affect timelines. So the next steps, we're going to be workshopping this with City Council on October 1st, and then having a public hearing started on October 15th. We'll be continuing that public hearing on November 15th. So that November 5th is the continuation where we're hoping City Council will take a final action. So those are the next steps coming up.
I just want to clarify that that's due to a constraint on the end of the State Department of Commerce, because all these comprehensive plans are being sent to Commerce for review. They're understaffed right now, and they need a little longer. They're typically given up to 60 days to complete review once we route code amendments to them, and they're telling us they're going to need the full 60 days. So we're planning for that, and we've had to set up our calendar accordingly, which is why we've included that extension of the hearing and a final action in November.
The days that you refer to, are those calendar days or work days?
Those are calendar days.
Calendar days.
Okay, who has questions? Ajay, it looks like you have a question.
Yes.
Actually, let me first, I need to apologize and I should have changed the agenda earlier, and I didn't do this. So just for you guys and for anybody who might be listening in. So the agenda, so we are going to do a public hearing on this. So we'll take public comment on this and then take action. And since it's the only item on the agenda, then there's no public comment at the end of the agenda. So just to be clear, the one shot here is going to be during the public hearing. Okay. I should have cleaned that up at the beginning. I forgot to. Ajay, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Can you go back to the one where you were looking at the boards? You had the size of the board.
Yes.
Yeah, here. When you talk about, can you go to the next one? You had the timeline for this, right? No. I think you're going back. You had the timeline listed for this thing, which was like you were changing it to 21 days to
This one?
notice requirement. No.
Notice
Comment period.
There we go.
period.
The comment period. The
Okay,
comment
we got
period.
there.
Okay. So here's what I thought. When we were looking at the comment period of 21 days and we're going to change it to 14 days, I don't think we can treat this as a separate activity, just to say that let's change it from 21 to 14. We've got to make something easy for that. And I was thinking, where is the easy part of it? And when I was going through it, I realized if we change the notice board to have that QR code on it, that'll help people to quickly take it and respond. Because if I was walking by and I had that, I'll remember that and I'll say, okay, I've got to go and do this thing. And I'll be like, I forgot how do I do that? Let me go back and do that. But I'm not going immediately to do that. It's not the next Harry Potter novel. So I'm going to come back at a later time to do this thing. That all takes days, and it kind of cuts away for it. So I don't think we can, in my opinion, I don't think we can reduce it to 14 days without actually making it easier for the public to respond to those things, which the QR code is a fantastic way to do that. Is combining those two into one a complex ask? Is it going to make it harder?
Including a QR code on the onsite.
Yeah.
So
if I were to say, do this if you do that too.
We want to use QR codes. We don't want to codify the term QR code as being a component on a sign because technology changes. We want to have flexibility to do whatever would be easiest. Something else could come up that's even more convenient.
It could be the bit.ly, for all I care. Right? Some other way to do this thing, but easier way for people to know that as they're walking, they can quickly take out their phone, get that, or access it, be able to go back and do this thing. Then you're reducing it to 14 days for the comment is a perfectly valid thing because 14 days is enough time to do it. But if you say that we're not going to do any of those things and still change it to 14 days, then we're kind of cutting down on this one.
Right. So I would, if you recommended as a body, if you recommended to not change the on-site sign regulations, then I think to your point, if I'm getting this correctly, to keep the 21-day period.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I would agree with that.
Yeah, so keep it if you're not changing that. But if you're allowing a change, I would really love to see the QR code because that's really making it easy. And if we do it, we'll be an example for a lot of places. Let's get that in there, and then let's immediately, we can change that to 14 days, and you'll see enough of this one. And this is going back to Director Pyle when he said that we don't force it, but then it's more of a thing. But still, even given that, people are probably going to look at it and I lost it, forget about
Right.
it.
And as David was saying, the comment period is not the only time to comment on an application. However, what happens is when these notices go out, staff starts reviewing, not just planning, but public works, Sam Platt, fire. We route to the schools and all the people, but planning staff does not complete their review until the comment period has ended to make sure that planning is doing the review with any input that we can get from the residents. So it's not a one bite at the apple, but it's the initial bite, and the more people can get comments to us early on helps the project be successful.
Yeah, but then that nuance is something that only the geeks would get, right? Generally, people would walk by and say, I lost that, forget about it, right? So that's what I'm trying to say, is that let's try to
we
do
would
this.
love to be as geeky as possible about it.
Yeah.
So we also, we have we've evolved significantly as a city, and we now have all of our application materials online. We use a FTP site called Hightail, which works really well. You can put all the project documents in there. We also are using QR codes, jot forms now as well. So what we could do is we could set up a QR code that takes you to a link that has all of the files and then a link to a jot form to submit a comment.
Submit a comment, exactly.
And we're trying to then that goes right to the project planner and puts it in a spreadsheet automatically with the comments there that we can manage them. And it's been a lot better. The one piece that's missing is the QR code. And we also are really, so administratively, I am taken to task if noticing is not successful. I hear about it. And politically, people contact council members and I hear about it. And our goal is to reach people.
Yeah.
And if I'm not reaching people, I hear about it.
Yeah.
And I'm there to correct it. So what we're trying to do is to add some flexibility so that we can meet these timelines, but we're still 100% committed to doing all of the outreach possible to make sure we're reaching people. We just want to make sure that we have enough flexibility to be nimble to allow us to meet these new timelines that we have.
Got it. So that's a suggestion, if we can make that thing. Number two is that the 500 feet to 2,000 feet. This is my second and only comment on that. You had this one, where you had the 500 feet. Is there any standard that is maintained by Bellevue and Redmond, which also share Lake Sammamish? Have we had this done? Where are they in this kind of thing? They must also have a downhill.
There is a slope along the western
Yeah, the
shoreline.
western shoreline.
There's no down slope column of noticing. It's just a standard horizontal radius.
I see. So they don't have anything. So we've just had it as 1,000 to 2,000. Okay. Got it. Because
It was also added relatively recently. I want to say 2017 it was added to the code.
I see. I really like the proposed requirement of 500 feet, but can you explain but to at least 20 property owners? What does that mean?
Because there are portions of Sammamish that still have large lots, like there's I refer to as the circle lot subdivision because that's what I see on the zoning map. It's like 1 acre circle properties. It's like there's an equestrian center. I forget the name. I'm so sorry. Rock Meadow, thank you. Horse farm. So one house, if you do a 500-foot radius from there, it might only hit like 3 other homes. And so we want to make sure that that we have something that's more reasonable, but also recognize that sometimes there are places where you're not going to hit a lot of properties, and we still want we want outreach. We're not trying to reduce outreach. We just want it to be effective. So that's why we have that.
Okay. Is this going to become defunct if we get that technology update? I mean, I'm just saying not technology update, but the QR code and other things. Would that make it better? Or
So these are sort of baby steps, right? Like, so we'll do, like, let's do this, and we also, in the strike draft, we modified the language for what's included within a notice. A lot of people don't open up an envelope to read a notice. So by taking out some of the rigidity of it, get a notice out, but maybe it's a postcard. You don't have to open anything. Maybe that postcard has a QR code on it. Snap it, easy, done.
Yeah.
But the code doesn't give us the flexibility to do that right now.
Yeah.
So we're trying to be more geeky.
Yeah.
And get it so that it's more user friendly and get people to know about it and to be engaged.
I think that's the way to resolve it. I think we can get that resolved by this rather than trying to nickel and dime at 500 or 2,000 or 1,000 and so on and so forth. So that's the thing. Those are my questions. Thanks.
Ed?
Notification requirements. Is the SB 5290 mandates local jurisdiction to proceed with the notification, or that is something that is common and we've been practicing for years?
5290 doesn't have any changes to the RCW regarding noticing requirements. So we aren't required under 5290 to make any changes. I don't know if the Growth Management Act has noticing requirements in it.
Yeah, there
Okay.
are extensive requirements. Yeah, so Local Project Review Act has requirements. 5290 amends part of the Local Project Review Act, but the Growth Management Act, 3670A, has all sorts of requirements for noticing. The Shoreline Management Act, 17327 WAC, has extensive requirements for noticing. So generally, they all mirror each other, but they have a minimum requirement, and then they allow a jurisdiction to adopt something that is in addition to the minimum requirement.
And do they specifically say what type of notification? Could it be in an email? Could it be old-fashioned way letters or postcards? Do they say
Most of
that,
them
or
are
maybe they have to
old-fashioned, and it says that it shall be a sign, a mailing, and a publication. Publication is kind of a thing of the past because most of the newspapers are going away and nobody reads the legal ads. So publication is done in different ways. You know, we're exploring using social media now to try and do public noticing where we push out a social media release for a project. That's one way to get notices out there. But generally speaking, most of the rules that you see that are the baseline rules, the must-haves, are outdated. You know, it's a sign, it's a mailing radius, and it's a publication in the newspaper. But we go beyond that. We maintain email lists of interested parties. If you wanted to get all the city's notices by email, we'd be happy to send them to you. So you know, we do more than what the minimum requirement is already. The question is about fine tuning it in order to provide the flexibility needed to allow us to continue to really work towards, you know, making those timelines work.
And as far as the notification, as you probably know, I just jot down type of projects and a review. One is here in Examiner, SEPA, NEPA, public hearing for specific projects, public hearing for citywide projects. Are all notification the same no matter what?
There are different noticing requirements based on the action being taken by the city. So things that are citywide are generally legislation, code amendments like this one. So they have slightly different noticing requirements than a project would have. So for our land use project permits, we have these noticing requirements, and then comp plan updates and legislative updates have slightly different noticing requirements.
So these guidelines is general just for projects,
These modifications are just for land use applications.
but the land use applications, but again, example of a SEPA or NEPA, if there is a project that requires to go through the NEPA or SEPA process, then notification would be different.
So a SEPA determination does fall within the type 2 land use application. So that's in the table.
I didn't see reference to the SEPA and NEPA.
So we don't, NEPA has its own regulations because that's a federal regulation. So for the SEPA, we have the SEPA notifications as a type 2, and so we would do the noticing per whatever gets adopted.
So the SEPA notification pertains to type 2 actions, type 3 actions. SEPA in itself is a type 2 action. It's a project action. SEPA, however, there's different versions of SEPA. If you were to do a DNS, the determination of non-significance, which typically goes with a construction project,
Right.
then it's a standard type 2 action. It requires standard type 2 noticing, notice of application, notice of optional SEPA process, all the stuff that goes with it. But if you're going to do a determination of significance, that is not on the list. That results in an EIS being done. An EIS is now subject to
Different notification?
it's a whole different process, subject to state law. We don't have specific rules regarding an EIS in our code. We direct out to state law, and we follow state law for an environmental impact statement.
And if the project requires to go through the hearing examiner?
Then it would require notification as a project action, and it would require updating the sign. So usually with a type 3 action that's like a plat, what we'll do is we'll do the notice of application. So it would be a sign, a mailing radius, an email to all interested parties that are registered, and there'd be a publication in the newspaper. That I think we've recently dropped that by code, and we now do social media release instead. But what then would happen is we'd get through the review process. We would say, okay, this is great. We're gonna recommend approval to the hearing examiner, and a certain number of days before the hearing is scheduled, we would issue a SEPA threshold determination, DNS, right? Typically, a notice of recommendation to the hearing examiner, which includes the city's recommendation, and a notice of public hearing of the upcoming hearing, all in one document. Update the sign, send the mailing, do the social media release, and do an email to all interested parties and all registered parties of record.
David, you mentioned that one of the concerns that you have with the notification is that it takes, and I agree, it takes a lot of staff time, but the cost of notification, isn't it going to be recovered from the applicant's fee?
Yes, so all of the noticing fees are a pass-through fee, so all of the costs
It's going to be passed on, so it's not coming from the city budget.
Correct. So it's not coming through the city budget, but staff time, like us as a resource, we are pretty limited. So if there's a way for us to use ourselves more effectively and efficiently, this would help with that, with administering these regulations, managing these contracts. And we've had challenges with the 2,000-foot wide column where if a staff person is new to noticing, they get confused, and in order to get something out on time, they just do a 2,000-foot radius from the site, and then we have to tell the applicant, we have a bill that's larger than what we would have normally had because the staff didn't have the time to understand how the noticing should have gone.
I would also present that just because it's a pass through back to the applicant does not necessarily mean that it is a justification to have a bigger mailing or a larger sign. We routinely are debating our permit fees with applicants. And we are already seen by applicants as having some of the highest permit fees in the region. And applicants routinely tell our council members and tell their other, like the master builders, that the reason why housing costs so much is because city permit fees are so high.
Also, you mentioned one of the concerns that you have as far as posting the sign is that the cost associated with the possible foundation and call in before dig in. Are there some restrictions that city has to follow as far as where? Can you put the sign on a tree, on a post or something that does not require any post?
The current code doesn't allow for that. But if we have things more flexible, then we could attach to a fence. I wouldn't want to attach to a tree unless it was tied, like I wouldn't want to
Or to a
staple.
tree or a public post?
Right. So by having a smaller sign that's not as massive as the ones that we currently have, it could just be potentially a single post or something that's more easily installed on a site without having to dig, or without, there are times where they can't dig and they have to build this really expensive base to put the sign up, and that's like an additional $300 to a property owner to get that up.
So to be sure, we have hung signs on fences. We have hung signs in part on power poles where it was hard to get the sign in, and they were able to put one post in and they screwed into the power pole. We've improvised when needed in order to get the big sign up, but it is not an optimal thing. One of the other challenges is, and the reason why the cost is so high for the signs and the reason why there's a big lead time, is because of the size of the sign. It's outsized from what is reasonable or what you could get for a vinyl printed sticker to stick on a sign. So if we were able to bring the sign down just a little bit more into range, we could then be ordering a vinyl printed sticker that we could simply put on a template sign. But right now the sign maker is doing die cut lettering and hand lettering everything on the sign, which is a really large amount of man hours to do, especially when you're updating it, because they actually go out there. Oftentimes they swap out the panel, but I have seen them out there physically with a ladder changing the lettering out and putting up the die cut individual letters and spelling everything out. And it has led to misspellings, misnumberings, because they're doing this by hand and there's human error involved in that. Plus, if we were able to do a printed vinyl sticker, we could send it off to somebody who could get it to us overnight. We could be really quick about updating that. We could include a QR code on it. We could have a design template that we just get the giant vinyl sticker printed, reasonably sized vinyl sticker, and just stick it on the sign and update it.
Change of appeal, there was a reference to decision criteria. Can you elaborate on that? What does decision criteria mean?
So the code for all of our different land use applications, our conditional use permits, are
if I want to appeal the project, when you say decision, what is that, decision making? Decision criteria.
Right.
I have to justify why I'm doing it, or I'm confusing here.
So the purpose behind the proposed change is that you found something is actually wrong, and not just that you don't like it, because we don't do an objective review. We only do an objective review. We don't do a subjective review. If something meets the code and we have all the documentation to that effect, then we are required by law to approve it. And it can't be that, well, you're proposing to paint this building pink and therefore we're going to deny it because we don't like the color pink. So that doesn't happen. So the idea is that if there is something wrong, the setbacks are not being met. It's too tall for the height limits. There's not enough parking. There's too much parking. It's too dense. It's not dense enough. Like, what is it that's wrong about the project that you are appealing?
So I have to pinpoint in my appeal, I have to pinpoint what I'm actually
right. And so ideally,
appealing.
if we have someone who engages with the city early on, and a lot of people say, like, I don't like the project. Well, okay, I'm sorry. but this density is allowed. But then if they say, well, I don't agree with how you did the math, like, okay, then we can have a discussion about it. And then at the end, if the appellant still feels like the math wasn't done correctly, but staff does feel like the math was done correctly, then they can appeal it and they can say, hey, I talked with staff about this. I still disagree. Let's take this to the hearing examiner and let the hearing examiner hear it and actually have something to decide on, and not just someone saying, this, I don't like it. Well, just because we don't like something doesn't mean it's not allowable.
And my last question, when the applicant goes through the process, submit everything, and then go through the process and get a permit, is there a sunset clause that how long that permit is going to be good?
That's an
before
excellent question. So all of our land use applications will have a time limit by which someone needs to get a building permit. Or in the case of a preliminary short plat or preliminary subdivision, you have 5 years to get the final plat recorded. Other times it's you have been given a conditional use permit because you're going to expand your church or whatever your religious assembly is. You've got 2 years to get a building permit to get that construction started. And then the construction permits all have time limits as well to get the construction done within a 2-year period. So there are time limits for all the different things.
And you're not proposing any changes?
We aren't proposing to change any of that.
That's why I couldn't see it in here.
Yeah.
In many cases there, except for subdivisions, which I won't, don't get me started on that one. Generally speaking, the goal of these time limitations is to get people in and out, get construction projects started, get it done, get it finished, because construction is a disruption in the community. So we want to make sure that we're in and out as quickly as possible so that stuff just doesn't linger and continue on. Obviously, there are cases that do, but we try to avoid those.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Ajam.
Mine are simpler. So the review periods, I support what you need if you need those periods because that's how long it takes. But on the other side, when I put myself in the shoe of the applicant, when you tell me it's going to take a month longer, that hurts. And I'm not sure what can the city do to expedite the review process.
So the additional time that the city is proposing is because Sammamish is so complicated. We have really strong regulations regarding our critical areas. We have really strong regulations for our shorelines. And it's those projects that really bump up those median timelines that we've had for applications in the past. And by having that larger number, it helps applicants usually up front. Everybody wants it faster. Absolutely. I totally get that. But they also want some sense of reality. Like they would rather know up front it's going to be 90 days than hope it's only 30. So that sort of assurance of reality, it might be a bitter pill to swallow, but generally people prefer an honest time frame.
And is it 90 days or is it up to 90 days?
Up to.
Okay.
So if we can get something out faster, we absolutely will.
Yeah.
So the staff, they've made a lot of strides in creating robust SOPs, solid screening procedures to make sure that when the applications do come in and are accepted, that they are complete and they have all the things that they need to get the reviews done. And we've done a lot of process improvements to streamline and make as many things parallel as possible so that we have a really clean, critical path to get to an action. So we're trying really hard to not let things get gummed up.
Okay.
One other thing to keep in mind is that we are under the Local Project Review Act obligated to revisit timelines. So we will be, and I have to say that a lot of the work that you all are doing with middle housing and some of the other stuff where we're really creating those objective requirements. We're cutting down on the ambiguity. We're really trying to simplify things that we're likely to see permit timelines, I would hope, come down over time, and that when we revisit the data on that, like a real pulls data from our permit system and is able to determine where the cluster lies in there, and we'll then come back with code updates going forward. The city hasn't proactively managed that, and the timelines that we've had, those timelines have been in the code since incorporation. We did make some minor adjustments just on one of them just a few years ago, but other than that, they've just been untouched. And we are supposed to be revisiting those. And now that we're going to be reporting out to Commerce every 5 years on housing and all these other things, we are going to actively be more actively managing the data and responding to that to make sure that we're fine tuning things.
The changes you'd like to make to the appeals, I support those. If I'm submitting an appeal, I better tell you why and document it and follow with codes and regulations. The comments period going from 21 days to 14 days, personally, I prefer to keep the 21 days, just knowing that many people, they're out of town for 2 weeks. So when they come back, I'm sure they won't be able to get right away to, oh, there's a new sign here. If we can just keep it to the 21 days, I think that's better. The signs, I agree with you. They need to be changed. What we currently use, I don't think it's doing the purpose that's intended the right way. There are different ways that this can be done. It's just, I don't like to leave it up to the director to decide what kind of a sign for this or that or different projects. I prefer that if we come up with a standard sign for maybe most of the projects that will fit, and before I say, yes, let's change it to just a smaller size, or let's add a barcode, or let's add a QR code. And I'm not sure if you guys can come up with just a mock-up, a template, a sample that shows how would it look like, how will people be able to see it. Right now they see it because it's huge, but we don't need it to be that huge. Maybe we use colors, maybe we use different things to attract people. Maybe we use, like you said, emails, different ways. If there's just a way we can see how are we going to change it, this way we make sure that the public, they get the information they needed. The changes to the column, that one, I'm between keep it and modify it. The fact that you are proposing to, at the minimum, contact 20 houses downhill, that makes me feel much better. So I'll see what everyone else will feel about that one.
John, anything?
Well, first of all, thank you for reading my long list of notes. I didn't expect you to discuss them tonight. I was trying to get that sort of, a lot of it was just Scribner errors and my, thoughts that you could administratively deal with, but thank you. I'm going to go back a little bit because we've got some new commissioners to your previous presentation. And my experience, predictability and consistency in the application review issuance process is paramount to everything. Others have said that. So kudos to staff for working hard on those handouts and trying to get things updated. Also, it'll be interesting to see how the middle housing overlay sort of interacts with all this stuff. It sounds complicated. And just wading through this course is a lot. Yeah, my biggest concern there was I can't remember, I think it was in Clear and Grade, talking about how much could be 50 yards excavation from a single lot. Well, what is that when we get to middle housing kind of thing? That was my thing that kind of kicked it off for me. What's a lot, I fully support the flexibility in the signage, and in saying that to me means that you, through David, create new standard signs that can be, those standards can be published, but also you have the administrative flexibility for that next wave of technology that whatever changes. I will note, and this is a small risk, but it is one worth mentioning. There is a risk with tiny URLs and QR codes, particularly on vinyl signs, because someone can make a new QR code, put it over the existing one, and who knows where that goes. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but just it's one of those risks, particularly when you get in some real controversial project, that you got a lot of for and nays. Let's see, I was a little confused about the timelines. Are some of the timelines or all of the timelines going to be just calendar days, or is there going to be on the clock, off the clock kind of stuff? And sort of that, some of that answer might be reviewed to update commissioners that weren't here before.
Thank you. So for the time review periods, these are calendar days. And this is the amount of time that's on the city's chess clock. So we click back and forth with the applicant. The applicant generally has 90 days to get whatever revisions done to address staff comments. We are very nice. We often grant extensions like 99% of the time. So the applicant, we tell them, please get back to us in 90 days. So whatever time the applicant has to work on something, that does not count towards the city's time frame. If an application, and we see this with reasonable use exceptions, we start reviewing it, it's a complicated site, and Public Works says, oh, you need a standards deviation request because this driveway is on this steep hill and whatever it is. Then the clock stops with the reasonable use exception application, and then they go do their standards deviation with Public Works. And that doesn't count against the applicant, them doing that work, and that language is in the code. So that way applications can have their own buckets of time, and we don't have to worry about one review holding up another. So we have all that sort of laid out. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and so other commissioners might need more clarification. I'm fine with eliminating the downslope notice as an absolute requirement, but suggest that we add at the director's discretion based on the potential project that there may be a requirement added. Does that need to be a motion?
That would need to be a motion because that's not what we have in the strike draft. So
Okay,
that would
so
be.
when we come back to that, well,
I don't think we'd object to that either.
I'm okay with shortening the appeals, or the way that you're recommending the appeals work, as long as you're still taking comments all the way up to issuance. And that seems to not jive with the 14-day period. Was the 14 days just for the appeal itself, or was that for?
Bear with me, my words. The comment period is to encourage residents to provide comments while an application is in its first round of review.
Okay.
So comments are always accepted afterwards. If you provide a comment after it's been 3 rounds of review, it could be really difficult to either incorporate that feedback or to have time to have a discussion with the resident about maybe exactly what they want isn't doable, but maybe something could be worked out, because that's going to eat into the chess clock with the city.
But that would vest someone so that they could file a formal appeal.
Correct,
after.
correct.
Okay. Last item, and this is a soapbox item for me, not part of the code, is the code refers to the requirements for neighborhood meetings on these big projects. But there's this gap with, you've got a neighborhood and all of a sudden you've got a short plat and someone's got to do frontage improvements. And that doesn't get noticed really, but it impacts the neighborhood. So I don't know how to solve that problem. It's one of those things I keep calling out, that we get these islands of improvements in our old neighborhood that I've got one in my neighborhood that's like, I don't understand what Public Works was thinking when they designed that sidewalk.
So that's a bit of a separate work plan.
Yeah.
And I've back a long time ago when I was in your all's position on the Shoreline Planning Commission, we took up a fee in lieu for frontage improvements project. And the idea there was that instead of building the frontage there, that you would tack it on to the nearest sidewalk. Usually it was near a school. And the idea was to extend the sidewalk. The challenge is that it's hard to land on something that's not being built on the site. So builders have a harder time getting funding to build a sidewalk that's going to be put down the road. It's considered an impact fee. It depends how you position it, but it's another work plan that we could add to the work. It's a small thing that would be kind of fun to talk about, and we do agree. We do hear about it a lot, that there are these sidewalks to nowhere and frontage improvements to nowhere.
Yeah, thank you. So I think that's all I have. I'll come back with a motion requiring or suggesting the downslope notification at the discretion of the director.
Mike?
Amazingly, I still have some questions. Sorry. Well, there are things sort of touched on, but just need a little clarification. So for the radius, so the first, actually before, as you move to that page, the changes throughout, all the strike-throughs and such, overall will simplify things a lot. So kudos, I echo John, a ton of work went into this, and it was very noticeable if you actually went through and read a lot of the strike-throughs, or even some of them. So I have just a clarifying question. David, you mentioned about the complexity of the column and kind of figuring all that out. Could you just elaborate a little bit on what makes that so complex?
The landscape itself is not square. Oftentimes, you call it a downhill towards Lake Sammamish. Does that mean if a ravine winds this way, that you follow the ravine? Is it just sort of, if you were to take the bird's eye view, straight line to the lake from the property, is that where you are? Well, the shape of the lake could result in it being over here or over there. It's unclear. So
It's complicated.
So, if anything, if it was to be retained, I would advocate that it's the, following guidance is established by the director so that we can really nail that down because it's unclear.
Well, the other part that's sort of somewhat related, because part of the concern is around erosion hazard, or, these other hazard areas that we have that are downslope. So as your explanation, that you actually might or might not hit the erosion area depending on how you define the downslope, right? So given that, I think based on what we see elsewhere, and 500 feet radius, 1,000 feet, that's a pretty good amount of space. But there should be an opportunity to say, there's some real risks downhill from this. So I like that idea about at the discretion. I don't know if that's specific enough, but there should be something that provides some protection in these really kind of hard to define but important cases where there can be some real risk to the folks downhill. So I would go with the proposed 500 feet, but at least 20 property owners with the amendment that John is working on.
If I may, having language to allow for greater noticing per the discretion of the director in any situation would be great, because there are times where there's a large wetland and that's
Yeah.
one big system that could affect a lot of people, but then even a 500-foot radius may not
Yeah.
get to all the people that we think it should get to. So
Even 1,000?
yeah, so depending on where it
Yeah.
is, so maybe it's an even broader stroke sort of discretion that we could have.
Take a note. All right, so next page. This was the sign, yes. and the only concern, I was actually surprised with the comparisons in the other cities. It just said, at the discretion of the director. It just seems so wide open. And maybe that makes sense just to keep the code short, so I'm okay with that. It just seems like it would be better, like faster, if you had, here's like 4 different size signs that always work. And so maybe that's just part of the standard operating procedures and not in the code. That way it's not, well, like, oh, I'm feeling like we should go slightly larger today, not that that would happen. So anyways, I like that. And then next one, the 14 days, yes, absolutely. Because, and it made sense when you talked about, appeals and that there's opportunities to provide comments. I think, the same concern that Hisham had about 14 days. I'm traveling for 2 weeks, and then do I have a chance to make comments? I think that there's still enough opportunities for the public to comment following that 14-day period that I would be comfortable with that. And then finally, I do have one comment on the last slide that you had with the review periods. When you were talking about looking back at data and all that, it's like, yes, good job. But things have changed. And actually, David, you mentioned that we've made a number of changes. So it's quite likely that as you go through in another 3 years, that very few of these will actually go out to 90 days. So while I appreciate, and I think I couldn't comment any stronger in terms of like just trusting your analysis and what staff is recommending, it does feel to me like you'll find that actually the 90 days is longer than needed because of the changes that have gone on. So a question then is, if that hypothesis is true, then maybe the staff recommendations are a little bit longer because it's actually based on historical, not projections of what is likely. So if you had a sense of that, or if you're just being comfortable with the 90 days, and I recognize that it's like 90 or less, so that's not a problem. But anyway, just a little challenge question there in terms of if you're being a little too cautious with the 90 days.
I do run on the side of caution when it comes to these things. However, if the Planning Commission recommends 65 days, type 1s, they are simpler. As I said previously, we do have the language in the strike draft about an agreement with the applicant that's mutually agreed upon to have an extension. Otherwise, if they're not meeting the code, we're just going to have to deny the application. So 65 days, whatever the commission desires to recommend.
So part of me, I'm kind of torn over this because I have to believe, and I want to believe that what we're doing is going to lead to shorter permit review timelines. It's probably going to be longer before shorter because there's been so much change. So you're probably going to see a plug of data in the system where we have some poorly performing applications. Then over time, it'll start to clean itself up as the building community becomes comfortable, staff become comfortable, everything sort of resets. My future self would hate me for saying this, but I think that if we could add a requirement that the city revisit and the data, codify it every 2 years. And why I'm saying that is I think that staffing and permit timelines go hand in hand. And if we were to sequence the codified review requirement of this to position it right at the beginning of the budget process so that we understood how we were performing, that could help inform the budget process and in terms of staffing and in terms of fee schedules, because we're also doing fee schedules alongside the budget process. So my suggestion would be is to stick with this as a starting point based on the data that we have, and then codify a requirement that the department shall revisit or evaluate permit timelines based on actual permit performance on a biannual basis, beginning in the first year would be 2026. Right, so that would then obligate us to do that. Again, my future self will be kicking myself right now, but
Well, I'll just comment on the fact that things could go longer before they go shorter. That makes a lot of sense to me. That was actually really important. When you put a date or a number of days down there, it does tend to allow for that length. So it would be awesome if you could do that. I don't know if I would say we should put that in the letter and make that more formal. It'd be a great practice. But once something shows up in the code, it tends to be kind of sticky, hard to change. But I'd be fine with that. I wouldn't propose an amendment to the.
I wouldn't propose to support an amendment because you've got to go through your fee analysis and staffing analysis anyway, and that'll inform on. Council might make a decision to change the timelines to go longer with fewer staff. So hopefully not, but.
Or, we could be in a scenario where we have less staff and then we would not be able to perform on the timelines. So I'm also, always concerned about, that and wanting to make sure our budgets allow for adequate staff to complete the work.
Yeah, those points are all super and really help to support the staff recommendations. Thank you.
Anything?
Most of what I was going to say has been touched on, but I guess a couple of things. On the size of the signs, I'm not totally with a standardized sign template, and my reasoning is some developers might have their own preferences for layout for messaging. But I do support some kind of minimum size, sign size that's smaller than what is currently existing, or something to that effect, just to make things more apparent what the requirements are. Okay. Also, one other thing, again about QR codes. So I believe somebody mentioned a concern about graffiti, and I agree with that as well. A single spray of graffiti ruins a QR code; it doesn't scan anymore. So there should probably be some kind of safeguard around that. With respect to the legal, the appeals, would it be possible to include the appeals information on the wherever the QR code links to?
If we have a QR code that doesn't get vandalized, we can have all sorts of information. Our notices currently have appeal information on them already, so we would always provide information for how to submit an appeal, and we would have some sort of language on those to indicate that the appeal form would require this additional information. We would then also update the appeal it's not an application for an appeal, the appeal form that gets submitted. We would update that as well to have all the requirements spelled out with information to be as user-friendly as possible.
And then one final thing about this slide about the review periods, I feel like one other point of analysis that would be kind of useful is that like the 90 again, like you said, it's a median. I appreciate something like a confidence interval around the 90. So you know, the median's 90, but like say 95% of the cases fall between, I don't know, I'm just gonna make up two numbers, say like between 60 days and 120 days. And then that kind would be useful too. So like the median is 90, but most cases fall between this time and this time. Even as a messaging, I feel like that would help developers have a better sense of where they would actually.
Yeah, that's actually a really good comment. So we talk a lot internally about what we manage to, and I also heard a comment of, you know, if it's 90, then it's going to allow you to do up to 90, and we've been working on, you know, there are times when we are understaffed, we have people out on family leave, or somebody resigns, or something happens, and we have to build up again, right? So there's times when it takes longer, legitimately. There's also times when, you know, the staff see in their review cycle that, oh, this is due on this date, and that in the back of their mind, that means that they have up to this date to do it. So we've been working really hard on managing to the middle of the review cycle, and that instead of thinking of the deadline of when it's due as the date they have up till, they're thinking of they have to get it done in the middle of the cycle, but they actually have, you know, they know in the back of their head that if something comes up that they have a little bit of extra time. So it's really all about resetting, because if you're managing everything to the end of the timeline, then everything's managed to the end of the timeline, and you have to slowly pull yourself back because of the plug of work that you're doing to get back to the middle. So we've been working on that. And we've had our ups and downs with staffing, and it's not just one work group. One of the other challenges with permitting, I think is really important to understand, is that it's ebbs and flows of 5 different work groups. We've got, you know, planning, we've got public works, we've got transportation, we've got fire, we've got water and sewer. You know, so it's all these different work groups that might be understaffed at a point in time, and might be slowing the whole process down. We have to work together as a team, and we have to issue corrections letters and go through a cycle of review together as a team. It's kind of like the whole Boys in the Boat movie, where we all need to row together. And if we're not, then we're out of sequence and the whole thing falls apart. So that's one of the big challenges with permit review. My thesis for my graduate degree was all about permit review. So if you want to talk to me about that, I'd be happy to talk about it.
That's all from me.
Great. So I have 3 things. The 500-foot, 1,000-foot downslope topic. I think maybe we resolve it with, you know, doing some amendment at director's discretion, but I would point out that was put in there for a reason. And that reason is that in this community, we have bad history with people downslope being impacted by poor practices, lack of maintaining BMPs, poor design uphill. There's a lot of history in this community of that. And so it wasn't just for fun. We did that for a reason, and I don't think we should just throw it out. We do have a problem where people downslope can be affected. And frankly, in this community where we have a lot of trees, sometimes you don't even know a project is coming because it's 3 houses up and amongst the trees, and you're not up there on the hill very often. So I guess the point is, as I'll say again on a couple of these, to me, the underlying issue is not necessarily about 500 or 2,000 or whatever, right? It's about making sure that the people who could be impacted by a project become aware of that project or have the opportunity to become aware of that project. You know, the way it is right now, we've just kind of cut that off, and we're not really addressing what we're going to do. And we can have all the best of intentions in the world, but if it's not codified, are we really going to do it consistently over the long term? I don't know. But maybe the amendment will take care of that. Second topic, signs. Did I read it right? We're talking gigantic signs, but it says 2 by 3. So that's like this size right here.
This is what's currently in the code now. The practice has been the 4 by 4.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess I'm so,
yes.
Again, the same comment, right? I'm struggling to understand the purpose of the sign is so that people in the community nearby see it, walk over, drive over, whatever they do, and have the opportunity to learn about something that's going to happen. And I'm concerned that if so we're having two conversations about the sign. One is, how big is it? And I don't know, 2x3 doesn't seem gigantic to me, but you got to be able to see it. But then also content. To me, content, you can figure out the content. I don't put QR codes in all four corners, so if somebody spray paints one of them, the other ones are still there, right? But the right content, that's fine. But somehow, if it's going to be a sign, it's got to be a sign that serves the purpose, which is to catch people's attention and make them aware that there's something going on. So I can't tell. Are you, if your solution is we're going to laminate an 11 by 17 and staple it to the mailbox, I don't think that's what you're saying, by the way. But that. That starts to become not meeting the purpose of what we're trying to accomplish. Now, maybe the signs, if you said the signs don't work at all, we need to do something different. Okay, I get that too. But I guess I'm just pointing out that the content of the signs, in my opinion, should be a staff thing, figures out the best way to communicate content. But the underlying purpose of the sign needs to be maintained, which is to make people see, recognize, oh, it's the blue sign. I know what that means. I'm going to go walk over there and see what it says. That's got to be maintained somehow, whatever this ends up looking like, whatever size it is,
It sounds like there'd be some general interest, if I may so wager, in maybe if this regulations get adopted however you propose, and then whatever council decides to do, that if there is as an on-site sign as prescribed by the director, that perhaps we have a little workshop to develop some templates where, there could be agreement of if it's a subdivision versus an RUE, like it's this taller thing, or it's this, or there's more of them. Perhaps there doesn't need to be one big sign. Maybe there needs to be 5 small signs. And we could have a discussion as a community, so then it's not codified, so then if there need to be modifications or tweaks, but there could be a general cookbook menu of
again,
on-site signs.
my purpose here is just to point out that there's an underlying reason for doing this.
Right.
And as long as we maintain a focus on that, then some of the details can be worked out.
So the fascinating thing is the old signs, we had the blue signs, were too small. And we heard a lot about not getting people's attention. But those signs facilitated us putting a laminated 8.5 by 11 on this, and people would staple it to the sign. And that's what we used to do. That allowed us to get a lot of information on the sign because we could put a lot of stuff in fine print, but you had to stand there and read it. For me, I'd have to wear glasses to read it these days. Then, interestingly, we went to this requirement in the code, which was changed. But we started shopping around to see how to do this, and we came up with, the economical way to do it is just 4x4, because 24 by 36 is, you have to special order wood, it has to be cut. Like you can get bulk 4x4 plywood sheets, and we ended up with that. But the sign is so big that it is cumbersome to actually put information on the sign. So now you have less information, a bigger sign with less information. So the goal here, from my perspective, would be to find a sign that is effective to get people's attention, that is somewhere between that size and the old size that we have, that allows us to put the right information on it at the right size for the initial reading, and then QR codes to get additional information. And also that it's easy to see what phase it's in. Because that's been another complaint that we have, is that people don't understand, oh, it's a decision, oh, it's a notice of application, oh, there's a comment period. So how do we clearly show and kind of brand out so people know, oh, it's a different color thing on there. That means it's in notice of application. Then it's a notice of it's decision, right? It's easy to brand that out. And like Avril said, we might want to actually come back to you all for guidance on this or feedback as community representatives and take advantage of that in the beginning of the year, because we do actually thankfully have a bit of a light schedule in the very beginning of the year. And it might be actually kind of a fun exercise for us to bring this to you and have you give us feedback on it and help us make sure we're getting it right.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to spend too much time on signs, but I do want to make sure that the objective is kept in focus, right? The last thing is I just had a question about the the appeals and the requirement to articulate the reason for the appeals. And my question about it is, as I thought about it, I thought, okay, at the one end, there's I don't like the project. That's my reason for appeal. Yeah, well, of course, and at the other end, there's somebody who does this like detailed analysis of the code and provides specific numbers and everything like that. But not everybody who has perhaps a valid justification for an appeal is necessarily, I think, going to do that. So isn't there some subjective space in the middle where they say, or maybe there's not enough information about the project where it says, well, this says that it's going to be, I don't know, a 3-story something, right? And I don't think you can build 3 floors and meet the height requirements. So that kind of doesn't, it's not, I don't like it, but it's also not a dissertation on code either. It's somewhere in between. So is this going to still allow that consideration of those in between appeals?
Absolutely, absolutely. We would rather have someone go through a process. So if someone just says, they're not meeting parking, I can't tell you what section of the code is, that's fine. But they're not meeting parking. Like, okay, so then let's, figure it out. And, getting that appeal in, and by saying you need to have commented before the decision, hopefully we already know about the height issue. You resident, you're concerned about the height? Let me tell you what section of the code that we're looking at, so that you're not submitting a dissertation, but you are giving a little bit more informed dissent as to what it is. So staff is here to help everybody. Like, we're not here working for the applicant, we work for the public. We are working to enforce the code. So if someone wants that information about the code, we will give you all the information you want and try to make it as plain English as possible. So that way someone isn't stuck floundering on their own trying to figure out what is wrong. Like, they know something's wrong, they can't figure it out. We will absolutely help them.
Okay, great, thank you. Anything else for questions before we do at the public hearing? Syed?
Some general question. David, do you know where we are as compared with the other cities as far as how we're performing and meeting the SB 5290? Are we known to be more difficult city to deal with, or do we have any information on that, where we stand on it?
I think the less resourced cities like Sammamish have all taken turns being the one that is the poster child of not performing. However, and we've had our turn at that. We're not the worst right now, as far as I understand it. It's anecdotal. I don't have data. Our goal would to be not the worst. I'm curious what other cities are going to be doing with their timelines, because they'll, like we did, if they do the math and calculate out the timelines that they're actually needing, they might have bigger numbers, and I'm anticipating that many will. The initial reaction I've heard in regional meetings is that those timelines are generally pretty short, and if you start to think about 4 rounds of review because of a poorly performing applicant, it's actually not that much time for us to own it in our possession.
Also, most of these changes that you proposing make reference to ultimately the director make that decision. Wouldn't make sense because of your time is so valuable, and your time cannot be spread so thin among those different functions that you have. Should there be language, director or designee, at the end?
Yeah, so the code does already define that way. So if you go up higher into the definitions in the code and you look up director, the director for the Title 21 is the director of community development or designee.
So we don't need to kind of...
It's in there, yeah. Yep. You picked up on it exactly what it's intending to do, so thank you for that, yeah.
And also, we talked a little bit about the QR and all that, but do we put the phone number so in the case something goes wrong, I can call and talk to somebody? Is that automatic?
I think we would always want to have the city contact information, the name, the phone number, and the email of the person that you can contact, the project manager at the city.
Okay, on type 2 plan review, there was a reference to the unified zone development. Is that PUD? Yes?
No, that is a town center kind of like a PUD. It's a very unique thing to Sammamish.
Do we recognize PUD?
It's a UZDP. We do not have a PUD process in the city.
Hisham was talking about being creative. I want to make a suggestion, see what you think about. What do you think about changing the color of the sign to orange? And the reason is that people, they know anywhere that you go, particularly on freeways and all that, everything becomes orange. What do you think about that idea?
It might be confused with a construction sign or.
Oh, yeah, we would need to coordinate with the transportation group because I would not want to create on-site signs that people might take as like a traffic hazard. So just like I may not want a red sign. Yeah, so there would need to be coordination to make sure. And I don't know if Sandplat has like a patent on a certain shade of blue that we can't use. So we would want to reach out to all of our development review partners to make sure we're not stepping on anybody's toes.
I think one of the points here that we're trying to get to is that we need to be able to adapt to things that we learn and respond to things the community is asking us to do. So over time, the sign will likely largely remain the same, but you might start to see some things, some additions, some changes in order to respond to what we're hearing, right? I get a lot of feedback by way of the city council on things that are working and aren't working. So we want to be able to change them and not have them so rigid and codified in the code.
And also, I heard about the comment that you made about construction hours. Is that season? Does it have a seasonal variation? Because in the wintertime, 4 o'clock is already dark, and in the summertime, that's the middle of the day. Do we recognize that seasonal variation? That what time the project can start?
We don't have anything related to the seasons because this construction could also be for something inside.
So the answer is no, we don't have it.
No.
You don't see any need?
It's almost 8:30. We should make a motion. I'll make a motion to extend. We have to do public hearing, right? And then our motion, so 9 o'clock.
So move.
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded to extend to 9. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Thank you.
John had the amendment.
Well, we got to do our motion first. Any other questions for Abril or David? Okay, so next I'm going to open the public hearing. You guys in these late nights are starting to wear me down. So we'll open the public hearing on the streamlining administrative regulations related to Senate Bill 5290. And then after that, we'll have our motion, some discussion, perhaps an amendment, and we'll take a vote. So open the public hearing.
None at all. Hi, Mary Victor, Sammamish for 24 years. Really good input, feedback, ton of work that you guys have done. I'll just try to go through what I can in 7 minutes. The signs used to be blue. They were hard to read when they were blue. White was better. I think having all sorts of different signs is bad. You kind of need to have your flagship thing, not orange, please. I believe Redmond used to use like a light mint green, and it was nice. You could put it on it. I grew up on a farm, and the metal T-posts don't have to go in really deep. They stand up. Maybe you can get something that fits on there. I did want to talk first about the 1,000 feet, 500 feet. I was at the meeting when they adopted the 1,000 feet, and I thought, wow, 1,000-foot column to 2,000-foot column. I thought that was weird. It was only erosion hazard near sensitive water bodies. Sammamish is the only city that has that. It was from the 1994 thing, and it's because of the erosive soils we have and the steep slopes that we have. So very good, Chair Boffman. Great comments. We do need to do something for it. I do not like using the word radii. It means you're going to look up just as much as you're going to look down, and everyone here said downhill, downslope, down gradient. It's the people down below you. And I know in the first meetings you were saying if somebody was building here and I lived here, I'd want to know. So you do need to be able to do that. So I think it should be custom, kind of per the director's choice or director and designate. like you could actually say 500 to 1,000 feet is generally, but it could depend because if you have a large wetland, you'd need to go wider. And so it'd be like a minimum of 20 houses, 500 to 1,000, depending on director, particularly looking at impacts to critical areas or downslope, downgradient properties. Or I guess in some things, if it was a road or something, you might want people above for noise. So I think giving the director that discretion is awesome, but not giving a carte blanche that it's kind of guided by some things. I'm going to go to this page first. So I think the biggest thing for getting people's things done fast is you really need to have a very good, strict minimum set. When people have the wrong parcel number, it never gets changed. The city changes it internally to not get legally done, and that survey always has the wrong parcel number on it. That should never have even been accepted, or they have to change the thing. Sometimes they won't know the address because the address will change based on postal or whatever, but you need to know that. You need to know you need to know steep slopes and landslide hazard areas, because if you're doing that, the tree protection is 100%, where with the erosion hazard areas, it's 50%. Town center, it's 25%, and then it's 35% for regular. So if you don't know these things in the beginning, you can't do it. I've seen things that come in that the acreage is wrong. The acreage can't be wrong. If the acreage is wrong, then when you calculate the net density, when you take out the critical areas and you do the rounding, you end up with 16 lots instead of maybe the 7 that are maximum as a real example, which is going on right now. So I think I've even gone to meetings where you've been with the hearing examiner doing the appeal, that I'm there and I'm just like, why did this even get accepted? It should have been thrown out before it even became a permit. And then you guys spend the 120-day clock exceedance and half the year work. And it's just a nightmare. I mean, there should be a list of what you really need. And like, particularly for critical areas and everything else, there's no reason slopes can't be done. And slopes need to get done, just not steep slopes. The steep slopes are getting missed. But King County has had the 5-foot contours forever. The 2-foot contours are really good on Sammamish property tool. With the MS snipping tool, you can put your property on there. And don't just stop at the edge of the lot. You need the vicinity around it. So I mean, it's just basic stuff. Like in the old code, it was maybe a photo is needed. Everybody can do a photo. But then you have to say where the photo's taken from, because you can lie with photos with the wide angles that we have and make it, like it's really hard to make a steep slope look steep because you have to be pretty good. But I think we really need to work on that, because if you work on that, people will know what they need, and people will know. I think the reason you have to say that the director gets the 500 to 1,000 is the person who has to pay for that is going to want to know how much the charge is for notifying people. So I think you need a list of things, and they need to be done. If the people put it in, it's not a complete application until those things are done and fixed, and then you can start the clocks after that, after they've paid. So I think that's super important. I did want to mention in critical drainage areas, they're noticed a few times. I think that occurs twice in the code that it's 500 feet. Critical drainage areas were always allowed, but King County didn't define them. We defined them in 2017. It's 0 square feet where you've got Tamarack and Inglewood historic plats. It's 200 square feet for landslide hazard drainage areas, and it's 500 feet around lakes. So I think you have to watch about. So the real problem with this is you have tree code where you say you can trim up to 1/3 of the tree. Well, if I have a 150-foot tall tree, you can trim the bottom 50 feet without an arborist. That doesn't make any sense. And I believe the tree code actually says it's 25% without an arborist. So you don't want to put a whole bunch of numbers in this code that are conflict with the other code. The same thing with the stormwater, the critical drainage area. I gave an example. You've also got some roads and stormwater in there. And so you want to make sure that the code that controls that is the code that controls that, and the other one just references it. Otherwise, you have to do those scurry updates, kind of like they used to do with the master fee schedule. Like whenever you change that, you had to update the code. Finally, they just moved the master fee schedule out and took it down. So I think those things are really important. So downhillers, also on looking at the 500 or whatever. So this is Tamarack. This was done by the city. It wasn't a final version. Tamarack actually drains 3 ways: this way where I live, this way, and this way. So like the catchment area or the sub-basin is really what you want for the noticing, and that is going to vary. And yeah, it's a little bit difficult to figure out if you haven't done the drainage review, but it's just not a set number, and it needs to be for the different areas. I did a lot of review today. I didn't have time to write it up, so I think the easiest thing to do is just write you up an email with the list of things, because I don't think we want to go forward without some changes, and I think the changes that I have, they're tying all the silos of code together, and I've been doing this for about 8 to 10 years now, and there's just a lot of things that can go back and forth. So I'm almost out of time, 11 seconds. I'll try to email you by Monday, just with updates that I haven't been able to do from my notes, because I did read, I just didn't get time to type it in. Thanks. Great meeting.
Thanks, Mary. Anybody else? Anybody on the meeting online?
No hands raised online.
Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing. Would someone like to make a motion, which I think was in here?
So I would move to recommend the City Council approval of the proposed changes to the administrative procedures for permit applications as drafted in Exhibit 3, and further amend by the Planning Commission by amending the project notification distances to a minimum of 500 feet or a minimum of 20 residences. However, the director may require additional notification based on project character and/or location.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. I'm not going to try to repeat that very nuanced but spectacular motion. Any discussion or comments about that? Or anything else that you feel passionate we should try to adjust or disagree with, or anything like that? Wow. Yeah, maybe I'll just make a quick comment. I think that, this is a great body of work and hopefully helps in the long run, both in compliance with state requirements, but also, our permitting process. I would say that I think, just, for the record, that the focus here should be on the community and the people in the community and what helps them. And I think that's part of why we had such a discussion about things like the signs and the noticing, because our focus should be on making sure that, the future of Sammamish is what we all think it should be and what the community wants it to be and how we represent them. So I think all of those things are super important, and that's probably why we talk about how people become informed. And that's why I think that a lot of this stuff is really good to talk about, and I'm sure we'll have the opportunity to visit again if we need to, so that's good news. But for right now, we're going to be in compliance and give the director some more power.
Now, kudos to staff and real community focus.
Anything else?
Just I want to say thank you to staff. I think that there's a lot of work and you put a lot of effort into it. Thank you.
Thank you to the staff. This is great work. And I want to address one thing about the vandalizing component, which is there. If somebody wants to come and vandalize, they're not just going to look at the QR code, they're probably going to vandalize the whole board. So we'd still have the same problem. But great work. Thank you so much for all your work.
Okay, there's no other discussion, then I'm going to call a question. Let's take a vote. I'm not going to be able to repeat the motion. So I'm going to say it's been moved and seconded to recommend to the City Council the code amendments as discussed this evening and presented. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. Thank you, everyone. All right, since we don't have any public comment, because that was the only topic for this evening, is there anything else, David?
Not at this time, just other than a big thank you to you all for all the work you've put in, long meetings, working on things. We've got a few more meetings coming up, but then our calendar gets a lot lighter towards the end of November and into December. So we'll have some meetings canceled. We'll be putting out a calendar for you all here pretty soon. We're making sure we got it right before we tell you which meetings we think are canceled, so you don't make plans and then find out that, oh, we're calling you back. So
no more 4-hour meetings.
We're really trying to move away from
No
those,
promises,
yeah.
Ajay, no promises. Yeah, please take a look at the calendar. We'll see everybody next on September 19th. Would someone move to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. We adjourn. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. Others? I have a couple things, and I'm like John, a little slow, I think, but